We are slowly waiting for people to trickle into this session. Hi to everyone joining panel 2, activities on technologies related to accessibility, moderated by the ever amazing Adrian Chan. I want to welcome everyone back who is attending for the first, who was in our previous sessions, and then also everyone that is joining for the first time today. With that, I don't want to take up any more of our valuable time, so I'm going to pass this directly over to Adrian, and he can do a very short, succinct introduction for everyone.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrian Chan. I'm a professor in the Department of Systems and Computer Engineering, and welcome to the session, which I've entitled Assistive Technology, Innovations that Help Us Overcome Our Challenges. I think just to frame this particular session, what I want to say is first define assistive technology, which is devices, software, or equipment that help us work around our challenges. And it's a very kind of broad kind of definition there. These technologies are necessary for some of us, they're important for some of us, and they can provide benefit for all of us. And so before I introduce our speakers, what I wanted you to do is to kind of reflect on your own daily lives and the technologies that you use to overcome your own challenges that you face throughout the day. And to help you through this, I'll tell you a bit about one of my days that I had recently, and I want you to think about how that day would be 10, 15 years ago compared to what would be now. And so on this day, I woke up, I have a sunrise clock, alarm clock that wakes me up nice and gently. I used my voice-activated Google Home, which updated me on the latest news. After breakfast, I had to submit my taxes, which I dropped off in the one of the tax drop-off boxes. And yes, I do still use my taxes by hand, but I use the electronic software to check my work. And I use Google Maps to navigate to my destination in my car and walking. And I should have used Google beforehand to realize those drop boxes were actually closed. But I was able to navigate and find a nearby post office to then post my taxes. Later that day, I had to write some text for an amazing conference called Enable Ottawa, but I don't have time to talk about that now. I used Grammarly to check my spelling and grammar, and coffee to help me keep me awake. My smartphone reminded me that I was scheduled to meet with someone soon, which I connected it on Zoom video conferencing. I used my noise-canceling wireless headsets because my 4 young kids were making a lot of noise. With 4 young kids, bedtime is always interesting. The older ones are pretty good at brushing their teeth, thanks to various stools they can help that help them reach the sinks instead of climbing onto the counters. And once the kids were in bed, I spent some time relaxing, watching TV, not wanting to accidentally wake my kids. I kept the volume down and used closed captioning to follow along. While I was in bed, I was reading right after I loaded the dishwasher and started it up for the evening. What a day. And so through that, you can see how a number of technologies help me overcome various challenges through my day, and I'm sure that you can relate to some of these in your own lives. I'm very excited to introduce our panel today. I'll keep this short because you can find information on their biographies online. But we do have 3 wonderful experts and inspirational colleagues that I have the fortune and honor of collaborating with. From Carleton University, we have Chantal Trudel from the School of Industrial Design. We have Audrey Girouard from the School of Information Technology, also from Carleton University, and joining us as well as Claire Davies from the Department of Mechanical and Materials Engineering at Queen's University. And so I will let Chantal share her screen and kick things off.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? And can you see my student with sitting with a participant?
We can, yeah, we can see that.
Perfect. So I can't share with you just the immense breadth of the work that my students have been doing, working in the community in accessible design. So I'm just going to share with you some quick stories here. One of the things that's been interesting for me over the past few years working in the community is that my students use a lot of design methods to collect information and then produce designs. And one of the things we've been realizing is when we go out in the field is that sometimes the methods fail. And what's important about this is we start paying attention to what types of methods we're using to go and talk to people and learn about their experiences so that we can better address their needs and preferences in design. So this picture is one of my favorites because it's one of my students who was working on dementia-friendly design. This was my project over the past year with the Girouard Research Institute and St. Louis Residence, the long-term care home, and also we worked with seniors at the Chartwell Retirement Residence, which you'll see in the following slides. But what's happening here is she's brought a number of artifacts with her that she's using, we call them design probes, to basically engage in conversation with this senior about her daily life. And she's doing this to try to understand what might be able to assist her. She's a caretaker for a person living with dementia in taking care of her loved one. And what's most important, as you can see, is that she's listening, right? So she has all these artifacts here, but she's really engaged in the conversation with this senior. But before I bring you into their stories, I just want to highlight for you, so these are examples of my work. I used to work in architecture for almost 15 years, 10 of which was in healthcare design. And one of the most powerful methods to engage healthcare clinicians and patient advocacy groups in understanding how do we design these very complex buildings was actually building mock-ups. So these may look like final designs, but in actual fact, except for the wood wall that you see in the corner at the bottom, these are all mock-ups. And you can see that they're of very high fidelity. We go from paper mock-ups, cardboard, up to foam core, to eventually building full-scale rooms, which we bring clinicians into and the community to be able to assess the designs. And one of the interesting things here is there's the picture of the sink in this patient washroom, which was built according to the building code. And what we did is we brought in a number of wheelchairs that are used throughout the facility, and lo and behold, the wheelchairs didn't fit underneath the building code clearances for the sink. So as much as we want to follow standards and we produce drawings and we think we have it right with drawings, when you actually mock these things up, you learn a lot. And this has perhaps been the most powerful method that my students use whenever they're trying to engage the community. So one of the first things that we do is, as an exercise, is we put all our assumptions out on the table. And we all have assumptions. And that's really important to recognize. And then once we have those out on the table, we put them back out in the community to discuss them, to test them. And it really helps students get out of their preconceptions about what is the right approach. The other important aspect that we've learned is to try to anticipate and adapt our methods when we're in the field. So the example in the left-hand corner, you see those little portable cameras. Those are diaries. And the idea was we were going to give those to people living in retirement residences and get them to capture aspects of their daily living that are frustrating. But what we found is when we gave them the cameras, that they were uncomfortable with using the cameras. And so rather than forcing them to do a method that we had spent time to plan out, we diverted and we had a plan B in place to be able to capture their experiences. One of those is this idea of card sorting, which you see on the right and on the table. And this is an interesting way to kind of map out what people go through in their daily lives. But another interesting thing that came up when we were using this method is the woman who's wearing the red shirt sitting at the table with my students is visually impaired. So she could read some of the icons on the cards, but had difficulty with others. So what's happening in this scene is my student, Callum, who's sitting next to her, basically asked her just to talk out loud And then we started scribing what she was saying with the cards. So being ready to adapt is very, very important, and having a plan B and a plan C. One of the, as I mentioned, probably one of the most powerful things we can do, and it seems to work quite well, is to have different sensory models that we put out in front of people. So they could be visual, they could be tactile, they could be acoustic. I had students doing acoustic interfaces this year, which were really interesting. And we bring them out in successively, iteratively, over and over again, with the seniors that we're working with in this case, and get them to work through all those different modalities to see what starts to resonate with them. So I'm just going to share with you this one design by one of my students, Sophie Nakashima. And so she decided to work on a adapted car key that could, it was more of a future forward concept that was looking at the idea of mobility as a service across automobile travel. So going from, you know, person with dementia prior to being diagnosed and losing their license, they're still driving, but they need assistance. So this car key would be able to provide some level of assistance in terms of finding your car. And as dementia progresses and you lose your license, you still use this car, but you use it, you still use this key, but you use it for ride sharing. So what the idea is that it becomes an artifact that carries through a variety of car services, but that you're familiar with, so that it's still familiar and easy to use for the person living with dementia. So what she did is you can see there's so many models that she developed over the course of a year, and then brought them continually to Chartwell and to Girouard, and had a variety of people work through the design with her and tell her what features were valuable and what were not valuable. And the other things that she did is she actually made them tactile. So the people that she was working with were very interested in a tactile experience, especially considering vision impairment and also lighting. And so she started to incorporate these into her design, and again, share them with the community. Sorry. And I'll just quickly share with you her, her video.
Hi, Chantal. Just quickly let you know that video probably won't work properly. If you try to share it, it just stutters and drops frames. So I think we might have to move on. We're running a little bit late, so if that's okay with you.
Storytelling, interfaces to convey the ideas.
I think it's probably best that we move on to the next presenter at this point, just because I don't want to run out of time and give everyone equal opportunity to discuss. Chantal, we can share your video and your presentation with our constituents as well, so that if they want to take a look at it after the fact, that's probably the easiest way to go.
This is just my last slide, is that, and ironically, it's that we need to make time. So this is what all of my students have said throughout their studies. So that's my last takeaway for you. Sorry to intrude on your time, my other colleagues.
Yeah, we've got Audrey next. So if you'd like to start your presentation, you've got a short period of time to do so. So enjoy it.
I'm just going to share. Sorry, just preparing to share my screen. There we go. Okay. Hi, my name is Audrey Girouard. I'm in the School of Information Technology. I'm a human-computer interaction researcher, meaning that I'm interested in figuring out how we can interact with our computers in new ways. So what I've been looking at in the last few years is deformable devices. And that's not necessarily something that everybody knows about yet, which is why I'm researching it. That's what's really fun about research, is trying to imagine the future. And this is really part of what this is. So we all have, well, we don't all have, but we have rigid screens right now. We have rigid cell phones, but coming on the market in the next little while, we'll have flexible screens and flexible smartphones. There's a few manufacturers that have tried that very carefully right now, because if people are going to try to bend a rigid phone, imagine what they'll do to a flexible one. So that still allows me to, and my students, to imagine what we'll do with that. So we've mocked up quite a few flexible devices. You can see them here, of cell phone size, and then we can bend corners. We have a bendable game controller on the bottom that has rigid parts and buttons on the sides, but this flexible bridge in the middle that you can bend and twist for additional interactions. So I'm learning now that videos are not great, but hopefully you see a little bit of this one. This is just to help illustrate what you can do with a flexible device, meaning that you can bend it. And so you can bend corners, and you can bend the size to create action. So in this case, we have a rigid screen. We created a bendable, a little game that takes this input and allows the game to move based on the gestures. So we've ported this work into the field of accessibility because there's a lot of tangibility to these devices. They are physical, they are tangible, they require some dexterity. And so we saw opportunities to talk to people with disabilities about whether this type of new input could be interesting for them. And so I'll talk about two projects that are kind of an evolution somewhat, where we work with blind users and vision impaired users to use our device. So this first one is to control a mobile screen reader. A lot of blind users use VoiceOver in iOS to control to read what's on the screen. And so there's a lot of commands to control this interface so that you go to the current item, the next item, you can skip to the next chapter, you can go faster, and so forth. And so instead of using touch as the current interface works, we use bend. So our users could bend the corners and kind of fold the phone in half to control the different parameters. And while they were much, much slower with our interface than they are with VoiceOver, because it's amazing once people that are blind master this technology, it's amazing how fast they are controlling this interface. They become experts. They saw a lot of potential for our devices, for perhaps people that are learning to use these interfaces. That so there was a lot of potential. So we continued with this. And the next interesting device that we created, which is Bendy Pass, is again this flexible device. And you can see that there's no screen on it, partly because if it's for somebody that is blind, they may not need a screen, but partly because it's a research prototype. And we imagine that this might be an actual flexible smartphone in the future, but for our purposes, they are lovely silicone-based prototypes with a little electronics inside.
Just giving you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you. And so Here we would do different gestures, so bending the different corners up or down and folding the device in half. And if you do a series of them, then you have a password. And so this is equivalent to a pin, so 1, 2, 3, 4, except that now I'm bending the top left corner up, the bottom right corner up, I'm folding it in half, and then I'm bending the 2 corners. This may not...
Corner up, top right corner down, fold down, bottom right corner up, fold down, backspace, bottom left corner down, fold up, enter. You created a new password. Please enter it again to confirm.
So if the video doesn't work, I will post a link to a better version of it on YouTube. But you can see that you can do a series of them. There's right now some auditory feedback, but that could be turned off. And it's something that participants could remember after a week. So we did a lot of studies, and we co-designed the look of the device as well with some collaborators. And so we see a lot of opportunities to use surface deformation and deformable devices with people that are vision impaired or people with disabilities in general, and sort of a little sneak peek of images of other projects in my lab on this topic. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we'll let Claire start her presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping everybody can see that now. Excellent. So I am going to be talking about EGATE, Eye Gaze Assistive Technology Evaluation, and I'm actually going to just take one aspect of this, not a whole lot. I have to make a special thank you to Erin Perfect. It was her master's project that we're actually quoting the work from. So what we're actually doing is we're looking at augmentative and alternative communication. Now, augmentative and alternative communication is a method by which people who have complex disabilities may or may not be able to communicate. And so we have to use different means of communication. And so this particular thing is a bliss board where you can look at certain aspects of the screen, and using those looking gestures, you can actually identify different words within the screen. Now you can do that as well with eye gaze assistive technology. So what we do with eye gaze assistive technology is that the user interacts directly with a computer interface using their gaze. So typically the individual looks at the screen, and then after a predefined dwelling time on a certain aspect of the screen, that will create a click so that the mouse is actually clicking on the screen. Now, there are a variety of different facilitators and barriers to this eye gaze assistive technology. And so Erin and some of my other students undertook a systematic review to look at the facilitators and barriers. And we've heard a couple things this afternoon about people using therapy outcome measures and goal attainment scaling, actually being able to identify those key goals that a person would actually like to use in order to use that technology effectively. Now, the other thing that they identified is the barriers impeding success of eye gaze assistive technology, and those included things like prohibitive costs, technical issues, and personal factors. So the personal factors might be somebody in the family who just doesn't know how to use the technology effectively, and as a result can't help the individual who needs that technology. The prohibitive cost is one that's really interesting because this particular technology often costs between $20,000 and $30,000 per individual who needs this type of technology. And that creates a problem. But as with the iPad becoming more familiar to everyone today, that enables people with disabilities to actually touch the screen. We used to pay thousands of dollars for a Dynavox system and can now interact with a touch screen. Now we're moving on to the gaming world. And the gaming world uses eye tracking so that you can show your viewers where you look in the game. And so this is a Tobii 4C. Now the benefit of this Tobii 4C system is it's about 260 Canadian dollars. It's a really cheap system, and it can be enabled with Windows 10. So straightforward Windows 10 has eye control. And in this case, I was talking about the Tobii 4C, but using Windows 10, you can also interact with any of the Dynavox eye trackers, as well as other selected laptops and monitors, and a new technology eye tracker called iTech. So these are different things that can be used with just a standard Windows 10 operating system. And so this is what we found fascinating about the technology itself. So you can just go into your Windows, your ease of access settings, and go immediately into eye control and set up the use of an eye tracker on any computer. So within that, you've got access to a variety of different things. You can use the eye control keyboard, which allows you to select letters. You can use text to speech, as well as with those eye control settings, you can determine how much dwell time you want to use to select a click using that technology. So as you can see here, you can also just create a regular, normal, everyday mouse where you can get a double click. If you look at that portion of the screen, you can close a program using the close button. You can use your left or your right clicks. These are standard features within Windows 10. And here you go. Here's a picture of the scanning software, the software that you can look at in order to type sentences. Again, something that just pops up on the screen and allows you to do it effectively. In addition to having it accessible through Windows 10, you also have the option to download some GazePoint software, which is free from Tobii, and that allows you to actually do the mouse control itself. And so I'll briefly talk for 2 seconds about how we've used that technology in our research. And so we've done some standard test protocols, and the idea being that we should be able to use this to enable somebody to use it as an eye gaze assisted technology for interaction with their computer. So we've done a multi-directional tap task, which is a standard International Standards Organization task, in which you have to just look at the, in this case, blue dot until you dwell on it for a specific amount of time. And so what we looked at is the different sizes and the different dwell times required for kids to actually interact with a computer screen like this. In addition, we also went on to screen coverage tasks. So in this case, we were looking at different parts of the screen because especially some kids with cerebral palsy, they may not be able to look at the entire screen itself. So should we focus all the eye tracking and icons on specific parts of the screen? And so that's what we were evaluating in this case. Should we look at a specific part of the screen? And so there are different things that we can do with this cheap $260 technology. So we developed what's called the EGATE Framework, and this is my last slide. I'll just briefly introduce it for any occupational therapists, physiotherapists that are out there, or anybody who actually just wants to give it a try. The first thing we do is a preliminary assessment. Can the child use that technology for interacting with a computer? Then we do a usability assessment that lasts several weeks with that particular type of eye tracker. And then we can look at, does this person need one of these higher caliber trackers? If they can use it effectively and use it effectively repeatably, then we can look at buying maybe a Tobii Pro or something like that that costs $20,000. But until then, we can use this as an initial framework before moving on to future technologies. So I think that's all I wanted to say today, but thank you very much for listening. I kept it to just the eye tracking today, and I think it's fascinating that you can actually go out, buy one of these, and try it yourselves.
Well, thank you very much, Claire. I want to thank all the speakers today. Right following this session, we actually have a Q&A with these speakers as well as the previous panelists. And so what we're going to do is we'll close off this one, and then we'll start the next session shortly. So I'll turn it over to John to transition us.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, everybody. Again, I wanted to sort of take just a brief 30 seconds just I'm getting a lot of messages in the chat, things that it seems a lot of people are a little disappointed that they weren't able to hear a lot of the presentations in their full, for their full time slot. And it was a bit of a time crunch. And I want to take this opportunity to sort of say, we understand that that it's not the most ideal, and to bear with us that we're sort of learning. This is a new platform to us. And in the wake of COVID-19, we really, I think we all have to be as patient as we can with everyone to understand that we're all trying to do as best we can, given the technology and the time that we've had to prepare. So if you are interested, I'm going to be posting a link in the chat with our mailing list. I believe that most people that are already in here should have already seen it, but please feel free to share it with other people as well. And we will be sharing everyone's presentations there so that people will be able to take a look at the slides at their leisure, basically. So thanks again, and we'll see you all in about, we've got about 8 minutes or so of break, and when I'll be using that to assemble everyone into the next room. So thanks again for everyone, and if you've had some questions, please try to keep them on hand for the next session, because we will need to try to access those, in the full Q&A. So thanks again to everyone, and I will talk to you all very soon. Thanks.